The courtroom fell silent as Judge William Marshall brought down his gavel. He looked at the young black woman standing before him with a stern expression. Emma Turner shifted nervously, her hands clasped tightly in front of her plain blue dress. "Ms. Turner, this is your third late appearance in my courtroom," Judge Marshall said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Can you explain yourself?" Emma took a deep breath. "The bus broke down, Your Honor. I had to walk over a mile with my 2 children before finding another ride." The judge had heard many excuses during his 15 years on the bench. Some genuine, most not. He studied Emma's face, noting her tired eyes and the worn edges of her coat. Something about her seemed honest, but rules were rules. "Ms. Turner, while I understand difficulties can arise, this court operates on punctuality. Your repeated tardiness shows a disregard for our proceedings," Judge Marshall explained. "I'm imposing a fine of £200 for contempt." Emma's shoulders fell slightly, but she kept her composure. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied softly. As Emma turned to leave, the judge noticed how she carefully counted the coins in her small purse before putting it away. For a brief moment he wondered about her story, but then another case demanded his attention. What Judge Marshall didn't know was that Emma had been struggling since losing her job 3 months ago. She had been working as a cleaner at the local council building when she accidentally discovered some troubling documents. After reporting what she'd found to the proper authorities, strange things started happening. First came the threatening phone calls, then her sudden dismissal for budget cuts. Now Emma lived with her sister in a small flat across town, taking her children to school before making the long journey to the courthouse for her own minor traffic violation case. The fine would mean no new winter boots for her 7-year-old son James, whose old ones were already letting in water. Outside the courtroom, Emma sat on a wooden bench and called her sister. "How did it go?" her sister asked. "Not well," Emma replied quietly. "I got fined for being late again." "Oh, Emma, can you manage it?" Emma watched as people walked past, some in expensive suits, others in uniforms. "I'll have to. The judge doesn't know my situation, and I couldn't explain it all there in front of everyone." What Emma didn't say was that her tardiness had nothing to do with disrespect. That morning, someone had slashed the bus tires on her route. It was the 3rd strange incident this week, and she was certain it was connected to her upcoming testimony. Meanwhile, Judge Marshall sat in his chambers reviewing the next day's cases. His assistant, Robert, knocked lightly on the door. "The Collins corruption case begins tomorrow, sir. I've placed the witness list on your desk." The judge nodded, picking up the folder. As he scanned the names, one jumped out at him: Emma Turner. The same woman he had just fined was listed as the prosecution's key witness in the biggest corruption case their small town had seen in decades. "Robert, this witness, Turner, is she the cleaner who found the documents?" "Yes, sir. She discovered Councilor Collins accepting bribes from property developers. Apparently, she's been through quite an ordeal since coming forward." Judge Marshall leaned back in his chair, suddenly understanding Emma's situation in a new light. The bus breakdown might not have been an accident. Her tardiness might have had nothing to do with disrespect. As evening fell, Emma tucked her children into bed in the small room they shared at her sister's flat. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" asked her daughter Lucy. Emma smoothed her daughter's hair. "Of course we are, love. Sometimes doing the right thing is hard, but it's always worth it." She thought about tomorrow, how she would face the powerful people she was testifying against. She thought about the judge who had fined her, wondering if he would see her differently when she took the witness stand. Little did she know that Judge Marshall was already seeing her in a new light, and their paths would cross again very soon in ways that would change them both forever. The end. The next morning, Judge Marshall arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. The Collins corruption case weighed heavily on his mind, particularly after discovering that Emma Turner was the key witness. He had spent a restless night wondering about her circumstances. "Good morning, Your Honor," greeted his clerk as the judge entered his chambers. "Morning, Robert. Has Ms. Turner arrived yet?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, sir. She's been here since 7:30. Quite early, actually." Judge Marshall nodded, surprised. The woman he had fined for tardiness had arrived almost 2 hours before proceedings were set to begin. As he prepared for court, there was a knock at his door. Robert appeared again, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Sir, Ms. Turner is asking to speak with you. I explained it's not appropriate before testimony, but she insists it's important." The judge hesitated. This was highly unusual and potentially improper, yet something told him to make an exception. "Send her in, but stay present as a witness, please." When Emma entered, Judge Marshall noticed immediately that something was different about her. Though still wearing modest clothes, she carried herself with quiet determination. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept well. "Thank you for seeing me, Your Honor," she began. "I know this isn't proper, but I needed to tell you something before the trial begins. Please be brief, Ms. Turner. We must maintain proper procedure." Emma nodded. "Yesterday, when I was late to court, it wasn't just a bus breakdown. Someone had slashed the tires." She pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. "This is the third incident this week. My children's school has received strange calls asking about their schedule. Our flat was broken into, though nothing was taken." Judge Marshall's expression grew serious. "Have you reported these incidents?" "Yes, but the police say there's little they can do without proof of who's behind it." She took a deep breath. "I'm not asking for special treatment, Your Honor. I'll pay the fine you imposed. I just wanted you to know that I respect this court. My lateness wasn't about disrespect." The judge studied her carefully. "Why are you going through with the testimony despite these threats?" Emma's eyes met his directly. "Because my children are watching what I do. They need to know that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard." Something in her simple honesty touched Judge Marshall. For years, he had seen people as cases rather than as humans with complex lives. "Thank you for this information, Ms. Turner. I'll ensure security is aware of these concerns." After Emma left, the judge sat quietly for a moment. "Robert, please contact court security. I want extra measures in place today, and get me the file on yesterday's contempt charge." "Yes, sir." An hour later, the courtroom was packed as the Collins corruption case began. Counselor James Collins sat with his expensive legal team, looking confident in his tailored suit. On the prosecution side, the young district solicitor seemed nervous facing such experienced opposition. Judge Marshall watched as Emma took the witness stand. She looked small against the grand wood paneling, but her voice was clear as she was, sworn in. "Ms. Turner, please tell the court how you came to discover the documents in question," the prosecutor began. "I was cleaning Counselor Collins' office after hours, as was my job," Emma explained. "While emptying his bin, I noticed torn papers with large amounts of money mentioned. I didn't mean to snoop, but when I saw the figures matched new building projects in our town, I became concerned." "And what did you do with this information?" "I reported it to my supervisor. 2 days later, I was told my position was being eliminated due to budget cuts." The defense lawyer stood up, his expression mug. "Ms. Turner, isn't it true you were often late to work? Perhaps your dismissal had nothing to do with these alleged documents?" Emma remained calm. "I was late twice in 3 years, sir. Both times when my son was ill." From his bench, Judge Marshall observed the subtle intimidation tactics used by the defense. He noticed how Collins occasionally stared at Emma when she spoke, how his lawyers exchanged knowing glances. As the questioning continued, Judge Marshall saw what he had missed yesterday: Emma's extraordinary courage. While he had been concerned with courtroom protocol, she had been fighting a lonely battle for truth, absorbing personal costs he couldn't imagine. When court recessed for lunch, the judge made 2 phone calls, one to court security and another to the witness protection coordinator. Whatever happened in this trial, he would ensure Emma Turner and her children were safe. As he returned to the courtroom, his gaze met Emma's briefly. There was no resentment in her eyes, only quiet resolve that made the judge reassess everything he thought he knew about strength. The end. The afternoon session of the trial began with tension filling the air. Emma returned to the witness stand, her hand steady despite the pressure. Judge Marshall watched carefully as the defense lawyer approached her with a cold smile. "Ms. Turner," he began, Let's discuss your financial situation. You're currently unemployed, correct? Yes, Emma replied simply. And you're struggling to make ends meet? Perhaps even hoping for some financial reward from this case? Before Emma could answer, Judge Marshall spoke up. Counsel, please focus on relevant questions. The witness's current financial situation is not on trial here. The lawyer adjusted his tie. Your Honor, I'm establishing potential bias. You may proceed, but tread carefully, the judge warned. The lawyer turned back to Emma. Ms. Turner, isn't it true that you only reported these documents after learning you might be laid off? Emma shook her head. No, sir, I reported them immediately. The layoff came after. And we only have your word for that, don't we? Actually, Emma said quietly, I sent an email to my supervisor. The timestamp would confirm my timeline. The lawyer paused, clearly surprised by this information. From his bench, Judge Marshall noted how Emma had prepared for this moment, how she remained dignified despite the attempts to undermine her. During a brief recess, Judge Marshall watched through his chamber window as Emma sat alone in the corridor. A court officer brought her a cup of tea and she smiled gratefully. The judge found himself wondering about her life before all this, before she became the center of the town's biggest scandal. When court resumed, the prosecution called a new witness, Brian Thompson, Emma's former supervisor. A nervous-looking man in his 50s, he seemed reluctant to make eye contact with anyone. Mr. Thompson, the prosecutor asked, did Ms. Turner report finding suspicious documents to you? I don't really recall, he mumbled. We had many cleaners reporting various things. Your Honor, the prosecutor said, I'd like to present Exhibit C, an email from Ms. Turner to Mr. Thompson dated March 15th. As the email was displayed on the courtroom screen, Emma's simple, clear message was revealed. Mr. Thompson, during tonight's cleaning, I found torn documents in Counselor Collins' bin showing payments of $50,000 to Mountain View developers. This seems concerning as they're bidding on the new housing project. Should I report this somewhere else? Thompson's face paled. Judge Marshall leaned forward, watching the man's reaction closely. Mr. Thompson, did you receive this email? The prosecutor asked. Yes, he admitted reluctantly. And what did you do with this information? Thompson glanced nervously at Counselor Collins. I informed Counselor Collins that one of the cleaning staff had seen some papers. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Marshall tapped his gavel once to restore order. And 2 days after, this Ms. Turner was dismissed. Who made that decision? Thompson shifted uncomfortably. It came from above. I was just following orders. During the afternoon break, Judge Marshall noticed Emma sitting with her 2 children who had arrived after school. Her son, about 7 years old, wore boots held together with duct tape. Her daughter, slightly older, was reading a library book, while Emma helped her son with homework. The judge felt a tightening in his chest as he remembered the fine he had imposed. That money could have bought new boots for the boy. Yet here was Emma, helping her child study while preparing to face more difficult questioning. When court resumed, the defense took a new approach, presenting Emma as a disgruntled ex-employee seeking revenge. But with each question, her calm responses revealed only a person of principle, not vengeance. Why didn't you just ignore what you found? The defense lawyer finally asked in frustration. Why cause all this trouble for yourself? Emma looked at her children sitting in the back row, then back at the lawyer. Because some things matter more than an easy life, she said simply. The town's money was meant for schools and parks, not for bribes. My children need those things. Everyone's children do. From his position on the bench, Judge Marshall saw what he had missed completely when Emma stood before him for the contempt charge. He had seen only a late defendant that day. Now he saw her courage, her integrity, her quiet strength. As the day's session ended, Judge Marshall made a decision. He pulled out the contempt order he had signed yesterday and crossed through it with his pen. The fine would be canceled. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was a beginning. Outside the courtroom, Emma hugged her children close, unaware that her burden had just become slightly lighter, and that the judge who had once seen her as just another case was now seeing her as she truly was, a woman of remarkable character. The end. The fourth day of the trial began with unexpected drama. As Emma arrived at the courthouse with her children, a black car pulled up beside them. Two men in dark suits approached quickly. "Miss Turner, could we have a word?" one of them asked, his voice low and urgent. Emma pulled her children closer. "Who are you?" Before the men could answer, a court security officer stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" The men exchanged glances and quickly returned to their car, driving away without another word. Inside the courthouse, Emma reported the incident to security. Judge Marshall, hearing about it minutes later, immediately ordered additional protection for her and her family. "These intimidation tactics must stop," he told the head of security firmly. "I want officers escorting Ms. Turner at all times while she's here." When court convened, Judge Marshall noticed Emma looked paler than usual but still composed. As she took the stand again, he made an unusual announcement. "Before we continue, I want to make it clear that this court will not tolerate any intimidation of witnesses. Anyone found attempting to influence testimony will face severe consequences." Emma gave the judge a grateful look as the prosecution continued presenting their case. Today they showed bank records revealing unusual deposits into Counselor Collins's personal account, all coinciding with town contract awards. During a brief recess, Judge Marshall observed Emma sitting in the corridor with her children. The little boy was drawing pictures while her daughter worked on homework. A court officer stood nearby, watchful and protective. The judge approached them, his formal robes making the children look up in awe. "Ms. Turner, how are you holding up?" he asked, quietly. "We're managing, Your Honor," she replied, surprised by his concern. He nodded toward her son. "What's your name, young man?" "Peter, sir," the boy answered shyly, showing his drawing of a superhero. "That's excellent work, Peter," the judge said with a genuine smile. Turning back to Emma, he spoke in a lower voice. "I've arranged for a security officer to escort you home today. Please don't hesitate to report any further incidents." "Thank you," Emma said, her eyes reflecting surprise at his kindness. When court resumed, Counselor Collins finally took the stand. Dressed impeccably, he projected confidence as he denied all wrongdoing. These payments were consulting fees, completely legitimate, he insisted. Ms. Turner misunderstood what she saw because she lacks the education to comprehend business matters. Judge Marshall noticed Emma's slight flinch at these words, but she remained dignified. During cross-examination, the prosecutor presented the key evidence. "Counselor Collins, how do you explain this text message to the developer? Deal confirmed, payment as discussed will secure your bid approval." Collins paled visibly. That's taken out of context. And these bank transfers occurring the very next day?" "Coincidence," Collins muttered, but his confidence was clearly shaken. By late afternoon, the evidence against Collins had mounted significantly. Judge Marshall watched the jury's reactions, noting their increasingly troubled expressions as more details emerged. After court adjourned for the day, the judge called both legal teams to his chambers. "I'm concerned about witness safety," he stated firmly. "Ms. Turner has reported several intimidation attempts." Collins's lawyer looked offended. "Your Honor, my client had nothing to do with any alleged intimidation. I'm not making accusations, Counselor. I'm stating facts. This court will ensure all witnesses are protected." After they left, Judge Marshall sat alone, troubled by the day's events. On impulse, he pulled out Emma's file again, reviewing her circumstances. A single mother of two, previously employed as a cleaner for 5 years with excellent reviews until her sudden dismissal. No criminal record, a small traffic violation that had brought her to his courtroom originally. He thought about the fine he had imposed and felt a deepening sense of regret. While technically justified, it now seemed unnecessarily harsh given her situation. That evening, Judge Marshall took the unusual step of visiting Emma's neighborhood. He didn't approach her flat, but drove slowly past, noting the rundown building and the lack of proper security. This was where a woman who had risked everything for truth was trying to raise her children safely. As he drove home to his comfortable house, the contrast troubled him deeply. Justice wasn't just about courtroom procedures and legal technicalities. It was about people's lives and the real consequences they faced. The next morning, before court began, Judge Marshall made several phone calls. First to the court administrative office about canceling Emma's fine, then to a colleague who served on the board of a community housing initiative. Finally, to the district attorney about witness protection options. When Emma arrived that morning, escorted by a security officer, Judge Marshall noticed her son was wearing new boots. Despite everything, she had somehow found a way to provide for her children. Her quiet dignity moved him more than any eloquent legal argument ever had. And the final day of the trial arrived with a sense of tension and anticipation. The courthouse was packed, with reporters waiting outside and every seat in the public gallery filled. Emma arrived early, accompanied by the court security officer who had been assigned to protect her family. Judge Marshall watched from his chamber window as she helped her children settle with a court volunteer who would look after them during the proceedings. Even in this moment of pressure, she took time to straighten her daughter's collar and give her son an encouraging smile. The closing arguments began promptly at 9. The prosecutor summarized the evidence clearly: the documents Emma had found, the suspicious bank transfers, the text messages, and the testimony of contractors who had been pressured to pay bribes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor concluded, this case ultimately rests on the courage of one ordinary citizen who chose to speak up when she discovered wrongdoing. Emma Turner had everything to lose and nothing to gain by coming forward, yet she did so because it was right. The defense made their final plea, arguing that the evidence was circumstantial and that Emma's testimony couldn't be trusted. But their arguments seemed hollow now, undermined by the mountain of evidence and by Emma's unwavering consistency throughout days of questioning. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Judge Marshall called a recess. He noticed Emma sitting, alone in the corridor, looking exhausted but relieved that her part was over. "Ms. Turner," he said, approaching her. "Might I have a word in my chambers?" Emma followed him, curious and slightly nervous. Inside his office, the judge gestured for her to sit. "Ms. Turner." "Emma, if I may, I wanted to speak with you privately before the verdict comes in." He placed a document on the desk between them. "This is the order canceling your contempt fine." Emma looked at the paper in surprise. "Thank you, Your Honor. But that's not necessary. I was late to court. I understand the rules." "The rules exist to serve justice, not to be followed blindly," he replied. "I failed to consider your circumstances. For that, I apologize." Emma seemed at a loss for words. "I don't know what to say." "There's more," Judge Marshall continued. "I've spoken with the District Housing Authority. Given the security concerns, they've approved an immediate transfer to a safer flat near your children's school. And the court's Victim Services Coordinator has found funds to help with the move." Tears formed in Emma's eyes. "Why would you do all this?" The judge looked at her thoughtfully. "Because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten after 15 years on the bench. That behind every case are real people with real lives. I saw you as just another late defendant that day. I failed to see you as a person." Before Emma could respond, there was a knock at the door. Robert, the judge's clerk, entered, looking surprised. "Sir, the jury is back already, less than 30 minutes. Judge Marshall nodded. "That was quick. We'll be right there." As they walked back to the courtroom, the judge spoke quietly. "Whatever the verdict, you've done something remarkable, Emma. You stood up for what's right when many would have looked away." The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. Judge Marshall asked for their verdict, and the response was clear: guilty on all counts. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Counselor Collins sank into his chair, his face ashen. Emma closed her eyes briefly, her expression one of quiet relief rather than triumph. After setting a date for sentencing, Judge Marshall made an unusual statement to the court. "Before we conclude today, I wish to acknowledge the courage it takes for ordinary citizens to stand up against corruption. Our justice system depends not just on police and courts, but on people of conscience who refuse to look away from wrongdoing. Ms. Turner exemplifies that courage, and this community owes her a debt of gratitude." 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Judge Marshall was walking through the park when he spotted Emma and her children on a playground. The children were laughing as they climbed on the equipment, looking carefree and secure. Emma sat on a bench watching them, a textbook open on her lap. He approached slowly, not wanting to intrude. "Good morning, Miss Turner." Emma looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Judge Marshall." "Studying?" he asked, gesturing to the book. "Yes, legal secretary courses. The Victim Services Fund is helping with tuition." The judge nodded, pleased. "How is the new flat working out?" "Wonderful," Emma replied. "The children are so much happier. Peter can walk to school now and Lisa has joined the library club." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the children play. "You know," Judge Marshall said finally, "I've been a judge for 15 years, but it took your case to teach me what justice really means. It's not just about following rules or punishing wrongdoing. It's about seeing the humanity in each person who comes before the court." Emma smiled. "And sometimes it takes an ordinary person to remind those in power of what truly matters." As Judge Marshall walked away, he glanced back to see Emma calling her children, gathering their things as they prepared to head home. Not to a place of fear and insecurity, but to a real home where they could thrive. In that moment, he knew that true justice had been served, not just in the courtroom, but in the restoration of one family's dignity and hope. The end.